Okay guys, so let's take a look on Photoshop. So we're gonna open Photoshop now. I'm using version 2020, but it doesn't matter which version you use. Most of the techniques for using the user interface can apply across all versions. All right, so you're going to fire up Photoshop now. So some of you, when you open Photoshop, you will notice that you get a kind of a welcome screen, and sometimes it might carry you directly onto the work page that has your artboard. So it doesn't really matter. If it carries you to a welcome screen, what is really showing you is some of the projects that you were working on. So these are actually some projects that I was working on. You're gonna go to create new document. That's located over here. All right, now when you click that, you're going to notice that it comes up with a window. Now this might look different, as I said, depending on which Photoshop version you're using, but you should notice the same ideas here. You should see the name, which is the name of the file, the document type, so that's selecting whether or not it's going to be on paper, it's going to be a web document. You're also going to choose your resolution. Now, for our purposes, just getting used to the interface, what we're going to do is we're going to just choose US paper. We're going to leave it on letter size, and we're going to leave everything as default here. And we're going to choose OK. Now when you do that, this is what you might see. Now the first thing to notice is your Photoshop layout might not look like my layout. And for those of you who maybe are used to a certain version of Photoshop, you might notice that, hey, okay, this other version looks different than what I'm used to. So the first thing that we're going to do is kind of just demystify why they all look different, because at its foundation all of them are pretty much the same layout. As a matter of fact, Photoshop hasn't really changed for over the last 20 years. It's gotten more fancy and it has a black theme, but the basic ideas are the same, right? You have your major zones. On this side here, we have our panels, and on this side here, we have our tools, and at the top here, that's all the way up here, we have our control panel and our menu, our drop down menus up top. So that's pretty much the three default zones that you get. Now, for some of us who might be saying, whoa, these are a lot of buttons. What do these buttons do? Now, the great thing about this tutorial is that we're going to kind of learn Photoshop in less than an hour, right? So we're not going to learn what every button does, but we're going to learn how to learn what the buttons do. So let's start with a broad brush, right? Now, on this side here, let's think of these tools as our general tools. What do I mean by general tools? Well, think about tools, something like perhaps this. I mean, this is a scissors. We might find this in most of our homes today. This is a general tool that that we might have in any typical home. Maybe like a hammer. Give me another general tool. How about I don't know, you could take any one of these, pliers, screwdrivers. These are all tools that you will see generally around the house. Any typical person would have. Now, the idea is that on this side, you might find that we have some icons here. We may not know what these icons do, but you can feel safe and assured in knowing that they're general icons that's going to be used throughout whatever we're working on in Photoshop. Now on the other side now, what we have over here are specific tools. Now what do I mean by that? Well, tools that you don't normally find in the typical home. For example, this. I mean, it's not a typical knife, it's a surgical knife. You wouldn't find the average Joe using a surgical knife to cut bread or to open a screwdriver. It is very specific. These tools, like what a dentist would use, it's very specific. It's used to clean teeth. It's not a general tool like a hammer that can have multiple purposes, right? You know, maybe this, and we might say, okay, I don't even know what that is. Some of us might say, okay, that's definitely a specific tool used to do something specific, and I have no idea what it is. Now in this case, this is something that's used to do tattoos, right? So maybe if you're a tattoo artist, you would recognize, hey, I know that that's a tool that you use to do tattoos. But chances are all of us would recognize that that is a scissors. So you can kind of think of these tools, or rather this zone, for the specific tools, right? You use them to do specific things depending on what you want to do. Our analogy, we had a surgical knife, so if we want to perform surgery, well, that tool will be on this side. Maybe we want to build a tattoo design, well, that tool will also be on this side. But maybe you just want to cut a piece of paper, well, you would find that tool on this side. So these are the default setup for the different zones, right? You have the general tools on this side and the specific tools over here. Now the thing is, what you have in the center up top is, think of it as your options that applies to your program, to your entire program. All right, and we're going to look into that. We're going to get a bit more into specifics as we go along. So now that we know what the zones are, what about the zone that's right in front of us? What are we looking on here? Well, this is known as our canvas, right? This is where the magic happens. And you can manipulate your canvas by using the mouse wheel, holding down Alt and using the mouse wheel to zoom, and holding space bar and left clicking to pan. Now in this case, I don't need to pan because I'm seeing all of the paper, but if I zoom in, then I might need to pan around like this. All right, and what I'm doing now, I'm holding space bar and left click, which is normal click. Now once I hold space bar, notice that my cursor changes to the little hand that you see here. So that means I'm now in pan mode. And when I click and hold, I can be able to move this around. So that's pretty much how you get to move around. You're pretty much going to be holding Alt to zoom and holding pan to pan around. All right. Now I also want to highlight this section down here at the bottom of our screens, right? And if we notice down this side, we see a percentage that we can see here. Oops, that's a little big. And that's the percentage there. Additionally, we see some numbers here, and we're going to get into that when we go into the lecture session when we talk about resolution. Now, what I want to highlight to you is that when you zoom, which is holding down Alt and using the mouse wheel, notice you see that percentage changes, right? So this basically tells you what size are you relative to the actual size of the paper, right? Basically telling you how much you're zoomed in and zoom out. Now it does give a little bit more information than that, but we're gonna discover that as we go along. Usually in an application, the bar at the bottom down here normally displays status, things like the amount of RAM, things that have to do with your zoom and your view and all of that stuff. That's normally displayed down the bottom section here. Now what we're going to do now is kind of explore the interface a bit. So I want you guys to follow along as we try to learn a bit more about the interface. Now if you have messed anything up, I want you to now go to or even if you haven't messed anything up or moved anything around, just to make sure we're all starting from 0, I want us to go to Window. This is for everybody, and I want you to go to Workspace, and we're going to go to Reset Essentials, right? And what this is a type of workspace layout for all the icons and all of that. And what it's going to do is reset it to the default, right? So this is the default for my version of Photoshop. Now, I want you guys to follow very carefully, because what we're going to do is manipulate the user interface. And while we're doing that, we're going to learn some tips about Photoshop. Now, if you look closely on your right hand side, now this side, remember, houses all the specific tools. Now notice you have some tabs here. You can move these tabs around. There are going to be quite a lot of buttons. If we look down here, we can see all of these buttons and areas to type in, and we might be saying, okay, what in the world are all of these buttons for? Now before we even start to investigate what they're for, what I want you guys to do, I want you guys to follow me, to just kind of get a feel of how this interface interacts. I want you to highlight, let's choose one of the tabs. I'm going to choose color, and I'm going to click, left click, which is normal click, and hold on the color button, and I'm going to drag that out like that. I'm going to do the same for swatches. I'm going to drag that out. Now you may not have some of these tabs open, but you will have tabs on this side of your screen. I want you to click and hold and just drag them out. Now I want you to do that to all of them. So things might get a bit crowded, but don't worry about it. I want you to just drag all of these guys out. Here I have, now in some cases you might have a button that's here. When you click it, you might see it expands into a tab. I want you to drag that out as well. Alright, now when you drag them out, I want you to drag them out as individual windows. So some of them might tend to join up with other windows, but I want you to drag them out as individual windows. See, I have a Learn tab here. I'm going to drag that out, make that by itself, and I have a Libraries tab. So pretty much I have now disengaged all of these tabs, and they're all floating in the middle of the screen. Now the reason I ask you to do that is I want you to notice how all of these tools are pretty much flexible. Now remember, we took all of these from the right hand side, which houses the specific tools. I remember we discussed specific tools before. There are tools that has a primary purpose. So things like what the dentist would use, and things like what you would use for a surgery, right? Things that you would use to do specific things like do a tattoo. So all of these examples here are examples of these windows that we have just dragged out, and each of these windows does a specific thing. You notice they all have different options, varying buttons and all of that. And don't worry about them too much because we won't be using every one of them. But think of this as if you were a surgeon and you are now coming into Photoshop to do a surgery. Well, you would look for all the tools that has the features that you want. So maybe you will have a scaffold tool, maybe you have some kind of cutting saw, maybe you have some kind of swab. You know, you would drag out all of the specific tools that is necessary for you to perform your surgery, using that as an analogy. So that's all these panels are, and that's what Photoshop calls them, titles them. They are panels. And there are many panels in Photoshop, definitely more than 50 panels. These are only some of the panels that starts up with Photoshop. Now, to kind of get the feel so that we can know what these panels do, I want to highlight some aspects for you. So first, let's close all of these panels that we have dragged out. And if you notice on each panel, there is an X, there is a little double arrow symbol, and there is also the name, right? So these, and there is also a menu button here. So every panel has these 4 elements. For now, I want us to close out these panels, so we're going to be clicking on the X, and we're going to be closing these guys out like that. All right. All right, great. Now, if your Photoshop had opened looking like this, you would be like, wait a minute, where are all the tools, right? But now you've discovered that, well, on the left side, it's general tools. I still don't necessarily know what these buttons do, but I know they are like the hammer, the saw, the screwdriver. And what was on the right side were specific tools that are used to do specific things. They're more precise. And I realized that I could drag them out and close them. Now, you might be saying, okay, how do I go about opening back these specific tools? Now, the specific tool that we're going to be using for this exercise, we're going to be using the color panel. And to open the color panel and all panels, you're going to go up to the window menu. And when you look in this list here now, this list is actually a listing of all the panels available to us in Photoshop. So I want us to go ahead and open the color panel by clicking that. And you're going to notice that the panel comes up. Now this is one of the panels that we had open originally, and we had closed them, and to open the panel we would go here. Now there are many panels here. Some of them I've never even used before, but each of these panels, as I said, think of them as specific tools. The scaffold, the welding rod, the surgery tool, the dentist tool. That's what these are, right? And if you do particular types of work in Photoshop, then you might be used to your particular tools. So anyway, we have opened the color tool, and that's where you can notice that there's a little tick beside it. So that's how you know that the color tool is open. Now when we open the color tool, I want us just to understand how panels work. So before, remember we said that we realized that the panel has a title. You're able to close the panel, you can minimize the panel, and then each panel has their own panel options, right? Now the actual panel now is where the meat of the matter is for this particular tool. So for example, if we took up that tool that the tattoo artist uses, well, all of the buttons and knobs located on his tool will be located in this space here, right? And in this case, this panel is called the color panel, and it has its features. And what it does, it allows you to change the color of whatever you're working on. Now, I can resize that tool, make it smaller, and I can also minimize it. Now when I minimize it, it turns into a little button that I can expand. When I click it, it expands again, and I can even minimize it all the way down to an actual icon. All right, let's maximize that again. All right, great. So now we understand how panels work. Now I want us to open another panel. Let's go to Window, and we're going to open the Layers panel. That's what layers look like there. I also want you to open, let's go again. We want you to open the History panel. And let's go again and open the Swatches panel. Now, if you had pulled apart your panels earlier, then when you open them back, they will still be apart. All right? So some of you might open panels and they might be together like this, where you see swatches and history together. Well, you just need to pull them apart. Now the idea is that these are the panels we want to use to do this activity. So we're only going to use these for now. Now I want us to arrange it in a particular way, right? Let's give you a recommended way. So layers are going to show you lists of layers here, so you're probably going to want this panel to be long. As a matter of fact, I want us to just dock them side by side, so I'm just going to dock this here, I'm going to dock that there, and I'm going to dock swatches there. So now I have my own little custom panel dock right here, and what I want us to do is we're going to go to Window, Workspace, and we're going to go to New Workspace, and we're going to call this DDM. At least that's what I'm going to call it. So now when I come back to my Photoshop, if somebody else was using my computer, and this was common in the computer labs, you might be used to your panels a certain way, and then you come back and then it's all over the place. Well, you can just go back and load your workspace settings right here. Right here it is, DDM. Okay, great. So now we kind of understand a little bit of where things are zoned and how to manipulate panels. Now I wanted to share some basic fundamentals of Photoshop, right? And in doing so, these are the main panels that we're going to use. Now up until this point, I expect everybody to have a page open. That's going to be letter size, and they should have these panels open, only these panels. All right, and at this point I'm going to actually save this file so I don't lose it, in case because we're in the middle of this activity. So I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'm going to call it DDM. All right, now notice when you're saving a Photoshop file, the default file type is PSD, right? If I click this drop down list here, I can see that I have many other file formats, including, we probably are used to things like JPEG and PNG and TIFF, but we're going to save this file as a Photoshop file, which is a file native to Photoshop, meaning you need Photoshop in order to open it. If we save it as another file type, we might end up losing some of the editable abilities. So we're going to name the file and we're going to save it there. And now the file is saved.